Good afternoon from my side. So the scope of my presentation is not going to be so much about automated public transport. I think there are many experts here at the conference today who are talking about that. But what I will talk about is really what the impact of increasing levels of automation in road transport, what impact that could have on urban mobility in the future. While we have companies like EasyMile, Navia, and other types of startups that are building vehicles to complement our high-capacity transport network, we shouldn't forget that we have a vast and established car-making industry, which is also investing heavily in automation. And they're not just car makers, they also are mobility operators. So many of the car makers here in Europe, they have car-sharing services operating in a number of cities. So they have their vision for automation, and they have their vision of how they see urban mobility in the future. So just one slide about what Polis is, in case you don't know. We are a European network of city and regional authorities promoting innovation in transport. So we essentially represent local and regional government, and we only work on transport, so sustainable transport, innovative transport solutions. We have a number of members here in Catalonia, so the region of Catalonia is a member, as is Barcelona City Council and Hospitalet. And outside of Catalonia, other Spanish members are Donostia, San Sebastián, Bilbao, and Madrid. So we are a network and association like AM2, so we provide services to our members. We provide essentially a space for our members to have peer-to-peer discussions about the transport challenges they have and some of the solutions that they should be working on. I was actually invited to say a few words about CityMobile 2, so I just have a couple of slides about that. I will not dwell on it because I think the previous speakers have addressed it in some detail. But maybe just to say that, Polis is involved in many European projects, research projects, demonstration projects. And this was one of the first projects where I saw real involvement of city authorities. Cities are and regions as well, they're involved in many European projects, but often they join these projects just to make their roads available for demonstrations. There's no real engagement on the side of the councils themselves. But this was one of the few projects where we had real engagement of real officers and politicians from the demonstration sites. Why was that? Because it's about public transport. The types of services we were demonstrating in the various cities, we were providing a public transport solution. So these are some quick facts about the various demonstration sites. I won't go through them. You will get the slides, I guess, in case you want to know more. But just one slide about some of the general lessons learned and recommendations. I'll skip the vehicle performance because I think Gilbert covered that in sufficient detail. But in terms of communication, how we communicate about these projects, there were a number of good practices, I think, that came from that, and that is that a lot of the demonstration sites, the city councils, they spent a lot of time and effort and money in raising awareness locally, in engaging with the media, but also engaging with the schools, and I think that's really, really fantastic. So we had the poster competition in San Sebastián and in La Rochelle, one of the large-scale demonstration sites. They went around to all the local schools. They used this project to have a discussion with schools and primary school children about sustainable mobility and automation as well. And we also, as you can see at the bottom picture on the right-hand side, for the launch of the Lausanne demonstration, we had the President of France and Switzerland there to inaugurate. So this was also good in terms of media interest. But now moving on to the main part of my presentation, which is about what could be the impact of automated vehicles on mobility in the future. I mean, we don't know. There are so many uncertainties: when it will happen, how it will happen, what role each stakeholder will play. But what we did within Polis with our members, so the city and regional authorities, was have a discussion about, well, what do we think will happen based on the various studies that have been made, based on the visions or the plans of the various vehicle manufacturers, the public transport operators, and the like. Why did we do this? Firstly, to address what we felt was optimism bias about AVs. If we were to believe everything we read and hear about automation, we would be forgiven for thinking that we will have fully automated vehicles within 5 years, everywhere, there'll be no congestion and no more accidents. But I think that's simply not the case. My own mum, she doesn't drive, she lives in London, I live in Belgium. She thinks that within 5 years, she will be able to call a car, that will, a driverless car, come and pick her up and bring her all the way over to me in Belgium. So, and that's not the first sort of story. Other friends of mine, they say the same things. You know, they're not transport professionals, so they don't have insight to what's really happening. So we wanted to encourage a more balanced debate about automated vehicles, about the positive outcomes that we could expect, but also some of the negative outcomes. And I think we are starting to see more and more in studies and in the press that maybe automation will lead to more congestion, maybe it will lead to, there will be more accidents. We simply don't know. Oops, yeah. So I just have 2 slides about the, I guess, some of the conclusions that we reached, which are, you know, this paper is a discussion paper. We're just raising a whole number of issues and a whole number of points that we feel merit further discussion in the future. So we sort of categorize them as follows. So in terms of travel behavior, so the text in green, of course, that's where we see positive outcome, but the text in red is possibly where there could be negative outcome. What will happen in 10, 20, 30 years, we don't know. The idea is that we have this discussion now, and then we help the government to think about policies and possibly regulation, new governance models to try and achieve the positive outcomes and to mitigate the negative outcomes. So I'm not going to go through all these in the interest of time. But in terms of travel behavior, we could, I go back. Okay. So maybe if I go back, yeah, that's it. You know, we see a lot of claims made that, okay, once we have automation, we may see a reduction in private car ownership in favor of public transport, shared mobility, and soft modes. If that happens, that would be great. But on the other side, we may see more motorized trips, whether that's private car, public transport, and that could be to the detriment of soft modes, so cycling and walking, and obviously to the detriment of our public health. The City of Amsterdam, they commissioned a study a couple of years ago into the potential impact of automation in their city. And so this is already quite unique for a city council to actually pay consultants to do a study about this. What was interesting is why they commissioned this study. So the City of Amsterdam wants to remove on-street parking and to take it underground. So they want to build more underground parking garages so that we can free up space at ground level for walking and cycling and more livable city-type activities. And in that reflection, they said, okay, well, if we invest in underground parking garages, that's a massive investment. That's an investment that's got to last 50, 60 years. But if we have automated vehicles in the near future, we will no longer need parking spaces in any case because automated vehicles will just be driving around. So do we need to make this investment in underground parking garages? So they commissioned this study. As part of this study, there was a survey of about 500 people, and the respondents were asked how they travel today and how they would travel once automated vehicles are there. And the worrying thing, I'm not sure you can read it here on the slides, was that 70% of public transport users said they would switch to an automated vehicle, and even 30% of cyclists said they would do that too. So that's quite worrying. From a spatial perspective, the positives, maybe we can remove on-street parking. I don't know if you're familiar with the International Transport Forum study, which was based on, it was a modeling exercise based on the city of Lisbon. And there they brought in a number of scenarios with automated vehicles, so robo-taxis, automated public transport, and the like. It's a study that's at least 4 years old. I know there have been some criticisms leveled at this study in terms of the methodology, and the assumptions made, but I think it was good in terms of getting a discussion going. But what they found is that we could recover 20% of road space by removing on-street parking, and 80% of, there will be 80% less space required for off-street parking. I'm not going to go through all of them because we're already over time. So we think there could be some, positive outcomes in terms of road safety. I mean, at the end of the day, we're automating vehicles in order to improve road safety because we know that a leading cause of accidents is driver distraction, use of smartphones and the like. So if that happens, that would be great. But I discovered quite recently that this would probably, from a city authority side, there is an assumption that once we have driverless cars, that vehicle will comply with all the traffic rules, whether that's in terms of speed limit, other types of rules. There will no longer be any red light violations, so no longer will cars drive through red lights. But apparently this will only happen once the vehicle is in full control. So once the driver has been fully taken out of the equation. When will that be? I don't know. I'm not going to go through the rest because we don't have time. Perhaps just in terms of some issues around legal liability and regulatory aspects. From our viewpoint, we feel that there should always be someone that is legally responsible for the driving of a car or a vehicle. So that could be the person inside, a central control center. We think that we may have to have new traffic rules for automated vehicles. And where automated vehicle fleets are rolled out as part of a car-sharing club, we feel that there has to be some sort of regulatory oversight. I'm going to go on. So key issues for cities and regions moving forward. Well, what policies do we need to develop for automated vehicles? We need to know a bit more about what we think the impacts are going to be. How do we plan for them? And how is this going to affect the way we develop our cities, the shape and the form of our cities? We would like to see a more holistic approach to automated vehicles, so not just about the car and the technology, the infrastructure and the service that's being offered. Personal security and safety, especially safety of vulnerable road users, so the interaction between the automated vehicle, cyclists, pedestrians, and also how do we tackle the predicted growth in trips or in kilometers that are actually driven. I mean, this is, we think that the automation will lead to more trips and more kilometers traveled. Can our cities and our regions cope with that? I don't think so. And the final issue is really about managing change. I mean, there's a lot of change that's happening in urban mobility, whether it's automation, traffic management, the growth of the private sector in delivering mobility services. And I'm going to move on. So what does this mean for public transport? Will public transport, as we know it today, still be there in the fully automated future? I mean, I really wonder. If you speak with some other stakeholders, this is a slide from a presentation by a representative of BMW, who we invited to a Polis meeting a couple of months ago to share their vision of automation and urban mobility. And as the vehicles become more and more automated, they see their role as a mobility operator growing, whether it's in terms of car sharing or even running other types of transport services. And again, a slide from the same presentation by BMW. BMW actually sees itself as a competitor of the traditional public transport operators, and in this case, Deutsche Bahn, because they see individual transport and public transport as converging. So this is something for the public transport operators. A slide from an economist from Stanford University, who is an expert in disruptive technologies and business models, who predicts that within 10 years of adoption of legislation allowing fully automated vehicles on our road, that 95% of trips will be through what he calls transport as a service, but demand-responsive transport, so door-to-door transport. So what impact will, I asked him the question, well, what does that mean for metros and buses and trains? According to him, they will no longer be used. But okay, I challenged him on that, and I said, well, I think that might be a vision or a scenario in the US, but I just couldn't see that happening here in Europe. Nope. And my final slide, there's a lot of talk about new mobility services, car sharing services, and the like, and can they take it all? Well, in our view, if you want to, it's not so easy for the driver to give up their car. So we would need massive modal shift. We don't think that shared cars, even if we have shared rides, that they can offer the capacity of our high capacity or our mass transit systems, even if all trips are shared. And what will the impact of that be on physical activity? I mean, will we be walking and cycling in the future, or will we call our robo-Uber or a robo-taxi? So these are some of the concerns that we have. And within Polis, this is something that we very much believe in and we're working on at the moment. It's really about governance and regulation, that we should not just allow this to happen, that we should be playing an active role in this. We should be steering this. And I very much like the example from Los Angeles, where they actually put out a call for micro-transit companies. So they're really trying to set up a dialogue and a structured relationship with these types of new mobility providers so that we can arrive at a win-win solution.